Okay, afternoon everybody. Right, lecture 3 today, week 3, Sustainable Project Management. This is going to be the final week we kind of talk about the context in which we're working before we start to move it on more specifically to look next week at business responses to sustainability, how business deals with sustainability and how we can use it as an opportunity. And then the following weeks after that we'll start looking physically at how we plan sustainability into projects, how we monitor, how we evaluate. So we'll get into really more detail in the next few weeks. But I think this first 3 weeks, this context setting is as important, if not more important, than the actual how to do things. Project managers are all very good at knowing methodologies and how to do things and which boxes to tick and which lists to use. But in my experience, project managers don't always understand the underlying issues. And if you don't understand the underlying issues, it's very easy to ignore them, okay? So it's, well, it doesn't say this on this piece of paper, so I'm not going to bother with sustainability. So what we've been doing over the last 3 weeks is trying to improve your ecological literacy, and we're going to do that again today. So today we're going to talk about sustainable development. So the last couple of weeks we've talked about the global environmental issues, the problems that we face. And you all did really well with that climate change task. It's not easy to try to think about some of these impacts and translate them into project management actions, but I think you did really well on that, much better than some people I've talked about who work in industry. So I work as a consultant often as well, and I've been going to London these last few weeks, working with a project management group there, and it's very difficult to get them to think about these issues. They're like, well, you know, it's not in my project plan, so I don't do it. They can't seem to make these links between some of the impacts that you did and project management. It's great to see the new generation can do that. So we're going to talk about sustainable development today. I'm going to give you a brief history of sustainability. How have we got to this point now where we're hearing it all the time, everywhere we go, sustainable this, sustainable that. We're going to look at the concepts of sustainable development, the definitions, what does it mean, and it's a term you'll hear again and again. If you work in construction, those of you, most of you do, in the UK, we have a presumption for sustainable development in everything that we do, okay? You have to prove to the local planners, the local government, that what you're doing is sustainable. It just is. So you'll hear that word a lot. We'll look at some of the models, some of the different dimensions of sustainability, and then we'll look at a little bit of the critique, okay? What's the problem with thinking about the world in this kind of lens? And then we're going to briefly introduce the assessment for you, which is the important thing, I guess. And we'll talk about that in more detail in the seminars, okay? So I'll just give you your assessment question today and what you need to do for that.
Alex, may I just ask a quick
Yeah,
question?
sure, of course.
Because I wasn't actually here to look for the last seminar, I heard that the Friday seminars are being shut down. Does that mean tomorrow, is it tomorrow's are on or off?
No, Friday session at 1 o'clock no longer happens.
So it's Wednesday?
Yeah, or Thursday, yeah. Okay, so anyone who was here on the Friday at 1 o'clock session, only for you, yeah? Yeah, if you weren't here last week. There's an academic skills module at the same time as that 1 o'clock one. Wasn't on our timetable, we couldn't do anything about it. It's a great free extra lesson to go to if you need help with writing essays, that kind of thing. And so the reason we've shut down this 1 o'clock session on Fridays so people can go to that if need be. So if you were in the 1 o'clock seminar, please come to one on Wednesday at 11, is it? Yeah, Wednesday at 11 or Thursday at 4 or Friday at 12. Okay, email me if you have any problems, okay? But I think most people were there, we kind of caught, so yeah, timetable problems again. Okay, sustainable development then. What is sustainable development? Well, here's one definition, and we'll touch on that in more detail in a minute. The whole point of sustainable development is that we try to meet our needs now, the needs we have as people living in this world right now, but we try to do that without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this is perhaps the most famous definition that you will have of sustainable development. So the idea is we need to use resources to live now, don't we? We need to use oil, we need to use building materials, we need to use food. But we shouldn't use them in such a way that our children and our children's children and our children's children's children cannot do the same thing. So very simply put, if we use all the oil in the ground, what's left? Nothing. How do we meet other generations' needs? This is the most enduring definition of sustainable development, and you'll hear this a lot. Okay, so just with that in mind, let's see how this kind of came about. So a brief history of sustainability. So sustainability has always been an issue, of course. It's always been an issue. We had big problems in Persia, 200 BC, times like that, a very long time ago. Cities would grow up, they'd use all the resources available to them, water, salt, they'd use all of the agriculture around them, until there was nothing left to use. They'd take all the nutrients out of the ground, they'd use all the water until it was impure, the waste systems weren't developed, and they simply just up sticks and they'd move and they'd build another city. The same happened in the Americas, okay, in 200, 300 BC, in that kind of era. We can't do that now, we don't have as much available land, there's a much bigger population. So sustainability has always been an issue. But it's often said it's not until 1962 that we really started to understand it as people. And that kind of started with this woman here, Rachel Carson. She was an ecologist and she wrote a book called Silent Spring, and it really woke up America and then the rest of the world to what the problems were with humans and the environment and development. What she did was she looked at toxology and ecology and agricultural practice in the Great Lakes in America. And she was the first person to make the link between all these species were dying in the lakes. The fish were dying, the fishermen couldn't get anything out of them. Well, there was great algae blooms on the lakes, there was lots of big problems with it. And she made the links between the agriculture that was going on around these lakes and the death and destruction of the lake ecosystems. And she wrote this book on it, and it really galvanized America. They were like, whoa, hang on, we didn't realize that our actions were causing this problem. And it also had problems for humans as well, who were using that water for irrigation and for drinking. So she was a real first person, if you like, at the vanguard of starting to make this link between human and environment. In the late 60s, Paul Ehrlich, a famous academic, came up with this book, The Population Book. The first person to actually make the link between the increasing human population and our use of environment. It was very, very controversial at the time. He basically he took a view that we had too many people in the world and we were probably going to die out as a species if we didn't curb the amount of children we were birthing, or we didn't curb the amount of people that we use in resources. Started this big debate about what do we do about population and the environment. Late 60s, Friends of the Earth established. You've probably come across some very famous environmental group. They started off actually, they were dedicated to the preservation of diversity and of citizens in decision making. They started to grow up not so much around environmental issues, but more about social issues, trying to ensure that people had the right votes, the right to kind of the right standard of living, that kind of thing. They were the first people to start to bring this agenda out, and it really started to get known at this point. Then America, 1969, they passed the first ever Environmental Policy Act in the world. So often we say, oh, the Americans, they're the problem, or they're consuming, or their evil ways of going around the world and doing what they do. But actually they were the first nation to start passing environmental laws. And this law has since become one of the most followed in the world, and other countries have been doing similar things. So it was the first country to establish a legislative framework to protect the environment. 70s came along, we started to get raising awareness about the people. People started to realise that actually the environment in which we live, in which we work, in which we use, is something we need to start really considering as something that's important. The first Earth Day was held in 1970. This was a teaching. This was back in the day when students students in the West anyway, used to revolt. Okay, students used to riot, students used to hold, what's the word I'm looking for, protests. Only really happens in other, a place like Turkey and that now. It doesn't really happen in the UK. So this was the first teaching, people sitting there, a peaceful demonstration. 20 million people participated in it across the world, saying, look, we need you to do something, governments, we need business to do something about our destruction. And then we had the Institute for Environment and Development, the IIED, where this timeline comes from, established in the United Kingdom. And this was trying to make the links between environment and development. And this is essentially sustainable development. How do we continue to use the resources that we need in order to grow and become more prosperous as a people, and at the same time minimise our impact on the environment? And that essentially is the big question. Then we had the limits to growth. The Club of Rome, very, very famous report which basically said, we can't have unlimited economic growth. We cannot. Nature is finite. We cannot recreate parts of the earth and part of the resources we're taking. So there will be a limit on how much we can develop as humans. Very controversial again. Developing countries said, whoa, 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 hang on a minute, what about technology? We can save the world, we can just build our way out of things. developing nations basically said, well, this isn't fair to us because you're saying we cannot grow. So what about all our people who are living in poverty? We want to have the same quality of life as you in America and Europe. Club of Rome said we cannot grow anymore. So it was the first link between environment, development and growth. This is when the UN started to get interested, and the UN started to set some laws and some settlements up. This is the first one, the UN Conference on Human, Environment and Development. So this is basically talking at the time about acid rain and the big problems that we had in Scandinavia around this time. So trying to make the link between human settlements, cities, buildings, people, and the destruction of the environment. And then following up with that was the OECD in Europe. Again, starting to looking for business to get better at making a link between environment and growth. The 80s we moved on, laying our foundations, trying to make, so we understood now that there was an issue, that we needed to try to do something about our relationship with natural resources. It was in the 80s that we started to formalise that with strategies and plans and ways of doing things. So we had the World Conservation Strategy in 1980, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. They wrote a book called Towards Sustainable Development and identifies poverty as the main link for environmental destruction. So as I said in the last few weeks, everything is linked. So they started to realise that needing to conserve our natural resources was a way of bringing people out of poverty. Similar, the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, governing what we can do with the seas, who owns the seas, a global commons, but which nations could fish the seas, which nations could protect particular areas, and it banned things like the dumping of waste at sea, which was, until 1982, a widespread practice. We just take everything out and pour it into the sea. 1987, the most famous and probably at the time, well, often said, the best example of a global agreement. The only one, arguably, that's ever worked. The ozone hole was discovered in about 1984, 1985. The ozone is a layer of gases which protect us from infrared radiation. Nothing to do with climate change, by the way, often confused with climate change. To do with skin cancer and issues such as that. And we found very clearly that we were destroying the ozone layer where it all gathers at the top there above Antarctic, above northern, in the northern hemisphere. Is that broken again? Is it because I use Prezi, do you think? Does it only work with PowerPoint? Or is it the ozone layer and the infrared? Destruction of the Earth. Yeah, I've broken it again.
Middle up.
It's in the middle. It's in the middle.
Middle up.
Middle up. Yeah.
We're just disturbing people.
Thank you. I'm going to have to get this looked at, aren't I? Does it go off in Robert lectures?
Only with you like you.
It's only me. It's because I use Prezi.
Unsustainable.
So sustainable. Wait for it to come back on. As I was saying about the ozone layer. So we discovered that it was HFCs and halocarbons. So the gases that we were using in our deodorants, if you remember, if any of you I wouldn't have, and the stuff that we use in fridges, refrigeration, was basically collecting in the atmosphere and creating this ozone hole. So we had the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. So we said we could no longer do that. And it was the only time we've been successful in actually phasing out the use of a particular substance. See what I'm going to do next week, I'll just go to dance or something. Just do it with puppets.
It changed aerosols as well, didn't it?
Yeah, we used to have aerosols, you used to be able to set fire to them and spray them like that, that's what we used to do as kids.
That was pretty awesome.
Can't do that anymore now, they've all got inert gases in.
Okay, spoil the ants. Right. So, yeah.
But you used to kill the ants with aerosols.
Well, that and the magnifying glass in the sun. I don't know why you said that to us as doctors or something.
Alright, I've got a 6-year-old boy, he does worse. Not that I'm comparing you up to a 6-year-old boy. Any thoughts? walk right around this monitor here.
This thing's on.
Huh?
It
Yeah,
looks like
it
it's
does.
on by.
Yeah. I think it has to cool down once it's had a
Now it's gone.
get it sorted for next week. This never happens to Brian Cox in the telly. Because he was a pop star, wasn't he? Okay, we're back on. Luckily or unluckily for you guys. Okay, so the Montreal Protocol, we managed to phase out our use of halocarbons, HFCs, the gases that were causing the problem at the time. And then came probably the most famous, or the centre point of sustainable development. The Brundtland Commission, basically. The World Commission on Environment and Development. It was just another UN nation, just another UN conference, but they got together and again for the first time decided to say, what can we do about putting environment and development together? How can we continue to grow as people and at the same time protect our environment? It was chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland, who was the next Prime Minister of Norway. Yes? Norway. And that's why it's often called the Brundtland Report. And that was the definition I gave you earlier. And then finally the IPCC was formed to start looking at climate change. So by the end of the 80s we got to the point where we realised this was a big issue and we started to try and do some legislation about it and try and sort it out. The 90s was all about business, okay, so this is where we start to get interested to a degree. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development published Changing Course, which was the first time that business kind of stood up and said, okay, so maybe we can do something about this. Maybe some of what we do can be changed. Maybe we can see this as opportunity. And everything kind of since with project management, sustainable project management, green business, kind of all stems from this kind of point here. And the World Business Council for Sustainable Development now has members from all over the world, CEOs from the biggest companies in the world are part of this. It's a big issue for business. In 1992 we had the Rio Earth Summit, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. This again was another United Nations Commission for Environment and Development conference. And this was the first time we decided to have something called the Rio Declaration, Agenda 21. We started to realise that we needed to do something at the local level, okay, city level. So in the UK we have something called the Covenant of Mayors, where cities get together to agree to do something about climate change and other issues such as that. 1996 we started to get environmental management standards. We're going to talk about this in project management context. A lot of companies will now use this, and projects will use such a standard to try to demonstrate how they're improving their management of the environmental systems in which they need to use for business purposes. And then finally, 1999, this is when economics started to get interesting. We've got the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. You've all probably heard of the Dow Jones Index and the FTSE 100 and all of these measures of economic prosperity for companies. So basically, the bigger you are, the higher up you are in this ranking. The Dow Jones Sustainability Index has become very, very influential. It's a measure of how sustainable a business is. And businesses want to be at the top of this now because they can attract more investment from banks looking to invest in sustainable companies. And some big names in here, Nike, Puma, some of these big names are actually at the top of this index now. So people are taking sustainability seriously at the end of the 90s rather than seeing it as a problem to have to deal with from a business point of view. Year 2000, the noughties. UN Millennium Goals in the year 2000, we decided it would be a great idea to come up with all these things we were going to do to save the world, save the planet. We came up with these 8 Millennium Development Goals that we would get all of these things done by the year 2015, so 2 years' time. How do you think we're doing? Eradicating poverty and hunger, are we going to do that in 2 years' time? Probably not. Universal education? Probably not. Gender equality, empower women. Women, do you feel more empowered now? You're going to be fully empowered by the year 2015? Probably not. You see the point? ensure environmental sustainability, a global partnership for development. But we're trying to set these goals now as nations, as people, and we're trying to stick to these. And these are things that are driving sustainability in business and projects at the moment. The World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, 2002. This marks 10 years since they first decided to kind of have these partnerships, and we started to come up with this non-negotiated response to sustainability. The idea is that us in the northern, affluent part of the world would sell out, would transfer our technologies to places like China, to India, to other nations who we've needed to develop, and we thought we could sell them our technology or we could pass it on to them and they would develop sustainably. In actual fact, the opposite has happened. China and India are selling us technologies back. They've got better at dealing with a solution than we have in Europe and America, arguably because they have to develop faster, and the more development, the faster you go, the more innovation is needed to sustain yourself. The Kyoto Protocol, hopefully you've all come across that before, the first ever legally binding framework for regulating carbon emissions across the world, came into force in 2005. And then in 2006 we have another economic measure, the Stern Review. Very famous economist Sir Nicholas Stern in the UK. He made the point that if we don't act now, it's going to cost us 3 times as much in the future to put right our actions. Very, very well regarded. People started to take notice that actually we really need to do something. We need to put some money into what we're doing now, otherwise we're going to be stuffed in the future. And then something else you'll notice here I've list off. Global financial crisis, 2008. 2009, the Copenhagen Conference of Parties, another climate negotiation. Nothing happened. We were supposed to be negotiating a new global agreement to reduce carbon emissions across business and countries. Because of the 2008 financial crisis, nobody would agree anything. So the Kyoto Protocol ran out last year. That was limiting our carbon we were putting into the air. We have no global agreement since, so we have nothing we're tied to. Big problem. And finally, where are we now? We're starting to get used to the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. We now can put a price on nature, if there is such a thing. We know how much it's costing us if we're going to lose things like rainforest biodiversity. Bollocks. Excuse me. I'm going to talk through this as we're going. 2011 I've got in here, China begins to shift to its green economy. So China now often seen to be the problem. China's developing too fast, what we're going to do about it. 2011 they put in place plans to be the first global green economy, the first nation to be seen as a green economy. That was a massive move. Countries like America saying, hang on a minute, we were supposed to be doing that first, aren't we the greatest in the world? All of a sudden, China was starting to take the centre stage. Good for them. Last year, 2012, we had the Rio Plus 20, so it was 20 years since the first conference. Again, no agreement. We have this global crisis. And then finally this year, our new climate change agreements, the IPCC, telling us that we're 95% sure that we are causing climate change and we need to do something about it. Okay. How many other lectures do you have in here? Just Rob?
Afterwards, yeah, 2 hours.
How come his never goes on? Has he only got one slide? You know what? Maybe he's got.
It's less interesting to me. Interesting.
Right, I can apologise for this. We'll get it sorted out for next week. When you do your evaluation at the end of the year and it says, are the facilities the university provides adequate? Just remember. Because when I complain about it, they'll say, oh, it's just you. Not that I complain.
The way the Jay-Z concert was awesome.
Yeah, was it good?
Yes.
So that's more interesting. Let's talk about the Jay-Z concert.
Oh, it was so good.
What's Beyonce then?
He shouted me out though, he read my top line.
Ah, what did you have on it?
It said 89 Brooklyn's finest. He actually read it out. It was so good.
Timberland.
Big shiny watch.
I reckon Jay-Z's probably got more wealth than several small South African
Yeah, he
nations.
probably does. You know, he's quite a powerhouse.
I was doing a lecture before with the undergraduates, so we were doing sustainable development, and one statistic which I forgot about, which I used, was did you know that there's 225 people in the world that have more wealth than 49% of the global population?
See, yeah, and I had a conversation with my pal, right? You know, like Carlos Slim, the richest guy in the world.
Yeah.
He sort out quite a lot of, you know, developing nations, realistically. And why, and
Yeah,
why
we
don't,
just robbed Bill Gates, couldn't we?
why don't they do that though? If I was a
There is some
billionaire.
sort of law where they take percent. If you earn over so much a year, they take a percentage. You obviously don't need that many billions.
That's called tax.
No, but more.
Then they wouldn't have to send them to do that.
Yeah, yeah. It's all interlinked, isn't it? Everything's interlinked. Global politics, all the rest of it.
Rap music, yes.
We'll talk about corporate social responsibility in the future as well, and some companies such as John Lewis, they limit the amount their chief exec can earn compared to the lowest paid member of staff. So it's something like 17 times the lowest paid member of staff's income is the maximum he can ever earn. So you don't have this situation where your CEO is earning 6 million and the cleaner's earning 5 quid an hour.
See, what about the bank system then? What's going on there with all these bonuses? Because they've been losing so much money. How are they getting bonuses? Things like that. How is that sustainable?
But the idea is that we need to pay people well to get the best people. We need the best people.
But they're screwing us over though.
Well, and then there's
Like you said, you just scientists more than like the government.
Yeah.
So they aren't the best people. They are. Scientists are the best people.
Scientists are the best people. Let's see, I like that. Some scientists are the best people. That one out of Back to the Future.
Yes.
What time is it? For those of you watching on the camera, this is the edited version. The actual lecture itself took 6 hours in the end.
they can just fast forward.
Yeah, you know, yeah.
Drag the slider across.
I bet the dudes in the Middle East are like, oh, we should go to Jersey.
Who is Jay-Z? Okay, let's see if we can get through the rest of this before it collapses on me again. Should we go fast? Okay, thank you. The concept of sustainable development. So trying to give you an idea of where we've got to. Sustainable development isn't something new that's just popped up over the last 10 years to hit businesses who've now got to deal with all these issues which have got nothing to do with it. It's the weight of over 40 years, 50 years worth of study, of growth, and we're at that tipping point now where we're really kind of in the middle of it. The most exciting time you can ever be working in this area. So the most common one, the one that you're all going to use in your essay probably, because you've got a clue what's going to come. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It's a nice kind of idea, okay? We can meet our needs now, but we don't have to kind of, our children can still live as well as we do. But it's a bit abstract. It doesn't really tell us anything, does it? It doesn't tell us how to achieve that. So we tried to start to come down to some other definitions. So we've got the International Institute for Sustainable Development, who says for business, sustainable development means adopting business strategies and activities that meet the needs of the enterprise and its stakeholders while protecting, sustaining and enhancing the human and natural resources will be needed for the future. So sustainable development for business is about continuing to be in business to a degree, okay? And you're not going to be in business in the future if you're using all your resources at such a rate that you're going to run out of them and you can't manufacture things anymore, you can't sell things anymore. So in a way, sustainable development for business is kind of self-serving. Yeah, it helps people and society, but in the same way, it also helps businesses continue to run and be profitable. And at the end of the day, I'm not blinkered. You guys are here to be project managers. You're here to make money. for yourself and for clients. So think of it that way. Sustainable development is about sustaining your operations to a degree. And then the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, they use the term eco-efficiency, because they like using the word eco-efficiency. It's a Northern European word. It's achieved by the delivery of competitively priced goods and satisfy human needs and bring quality of life whilst progressively reducing ecological impacts and resource intensity throughout the life cycle to a level at least in line with the Earth's carrying capacity. So again, it's about achieving what we need to achieve in order to help our well-being and develop ourselves as humans, but at the same time ensuring there's enough resources left to continue to do so. These are some of the models that you will see of sustainable development. Very important, this first one. Probably the most important thing today. Sustainability has 3 dimensions at least. It's not just about saving the fishes and the children and rabbits and all that kind of stuff and reducing fossil fuel use. It has these 3 interlocking and indispensable aspects. So environmental, yeah, it's about natural resources, environment use, preventing pollution to air, land, water and waste. But it's also about creating profit, reducing costs, economic growth, research and development. So sustainability cannot happen unless we do have some growth in the economy, or at least some degree of profit. There has to be some economic good for that. And then of course social, the other aspect, very important. Standards of living, education, community, equal opportunity. These soft fuzzy things are a little bit harder to define. And only then can we have sustainability. You can't have one without the other. I'll talk loud. Okay, so when sustainability was first being talked about, we did have these 3 separately. We were talking about eco-centric concerns. So we have a group of people called the deep greens, okay? The people who just want the earth to return to how it was pre-humans. Okay, so we should go back to having woodlands. We should bring wolves and bears back into the UK and other parts of Northern Europe. We should put nature back the way it was previously. Then we have technocentric concerns. Doesn't matter, we can all build our way out of it. We're so good as humans, we can develop new ways of doing anything. And if we do screw the earth up, we use all our resources, that's fine, because by then we'll be colonising Mars. Okay? And that is a view. Cornucopians, these people are called. They think that's fine. They've watched Star Trek, it happens in Star Trek, so it must be true. After all, they invented the iPad on Star Trek, I think. Social-centric concerns. Okay, it's all about people. Forget resources, forget technology, forget economy. It's all about people and wellness of life. But as we've moved through, we started to realise, actually, no, we do need all of these. We need to make money. Of course we do. We need to have technology to help us deal with our kind of daily lives, and we also need to think about a better quality of life for people. So we're starting to see this conversion, and we're getting there at the moment. That 3 spheres I showed you, the first one, it's about 10, 15 years old now. We're starting to realise maybe we should just be putting the whole thing together and not having these 3 separations at all. So the sustainable development as a concept is getting much more common. And there's this false idea that sustainable development is something that we should be achieving. There'll be a point in the future that will say, yeah, that's it now, we've done it. We developed sustainably, we've won, we're okay. It's not about that, of course. We will never ever get to the point where we're happy with the way that we live and the way that we grow and the way we use resources. It's a journey, and the journey is what's important, not the end outcome. Okay. And then again, can you see this one? This is another quite famous, well worth seeing. You can watch this, you can look on Blackboard for this. The nestled sustainability idea. Economy cannot happen outside of society, can it? Society creates the economy, okay? The economy is a construct of us. Thanks. Economy is a construct of society. You know, there was no economy, if you like, before humans existed. But also, society cannot exist outside of the environment, because we need water, we need food, we need air. So we cannot exist without that as well. So put them together, the economy cannot work without society, which cannot work without the environment. We need everything. So in a way, we need the environment. We absolutely need to make use of the resources we have. Otherwise we'll have no economy, which means we'll have no society. Self-perpetuating, as you can see. So, the environmental dimension of sustainable development. Okay, this is all about the maintenance and factors of practices that contribute to the quality of the environment on a long-term basis. the easy one, not using too much resources, being efficient with what you use, trying to reduce your use of non-renewable resources, such as fossil fuels. It's about supporting life, so things like forming soil, clean water, food, provisioning, providing us with wood for fire, for food, for shelter, pollination, okay, so we can have fruits and we can have vegetables. It's about regulating, because of course, as we saw last week, the environment controls our climate, keeps us cool, keeps us warm, keeps us safe, clean air, stormwater removal. And it's about cultural, which people often forget about. We like trees, yeah? Is that fair to say? We like going out and looking at the sea, we like being in beautiful parts of the world, in woodlands. We don't like kind of just to live in cities and live in these kind of darkened rooms with things that don't work. We like to have nature around us. So it's very important that we consider the environmental side of things, of course it is. But it's also the economic. So this is the use of strategies for employing existing resources optimally so that a responsible and beneficial balance can be achieved over the longer term. So within the business context, economic sustainability involves using the assets of the company efficiently to allow it to continue functioning profitably over time. So as I say, if you use up all your resources now, if you make plastics and use all the oil that you have access to, you're not going to be in business very long. You need to find alternatives, or at least provision what you are using. Economic sustainability. And finally, the one that always gets forgotten about, the difficult one, social sustainability. The ability of a social system, so us, our relationships as people and a culture, to function at a defined level of social well-being indefinitely. So this is something down the bottom called the Egan Wheel, which is all about sustainable communities and how sustainability in social terms is about us being safe in the cities we live in, the areas we live, access to, to be able to vote, to be able to have access to education, well-being, fair for everyone. So talking about people who have all of the resources in the earth, 225 people, more wealth than 49% of the world's population. So it's about fairness and equity, because again, that's an important thing for us as people. We want to live in a fair world. So only when you have these three aspects together can you say to be truly delivering sustainable development. Okay, so a quick critique of sustainable development. Well, the very word development means growth. Okay? So sustainable development is about sustainable growth, growing in economic terms, okay? GDP, growing as people, lifting ourselves out of poverty if we're in those kind of regions. If we're not in those regions, better quality of life for us and our children. But is growth itself sustainable? Can we continue to grow? Can we keep growing economically? Can we keep on earning more money as a country, as a nation, as people? So if growth is the fundamental cause of overusing nature, okay, because the more we grow, the more resources we need to use in order to grow, to manufacture, to make things, can the cause of the problem also be the solution? That's the big question. So if the problem is that we're growing too fast, we're using too many resources, can sustainable growth be the solution? Can we still grow sustainably? Nobody's really worked out yet. There are people who say we cannot grow no more, we need to stop. We need to contract, we need to converge, we need to stop using resources, full stop. If that means that we're poorer as people, so be it. We'll be more equitable, we'll be poorer overall in the Western nations. But again, is anybody prepared to accept that as a way of living? Do you all want to go, people have been living in recession in some countries, if you're from Ireland or Italy or somewhere like that, you're probably very used to, or even southern Spain at the moment, having to have massive cuts to your wages, massive cuts to your quality of living. People don't like it. People are out on the streets overthrowing governments because of it. So obviously we don't like to live in a world without growth. So we do need to find some way to keep on growing, albeit sustainably. So nature has its limits, and growth of nature can also be limited. So how do we achieve growth, but at the same time work within the physical limits that we have to nature? We only have so much resources. We cannot put more oil on the ground, okay? Maybe we can manufacture some different kind of systems, but we still need to work with the resources we have. And this is the big question that is facing us at the moment, business. This is the massive question. How can we continue to carry on doing business, making money, improving people's lives, at the same time as taking into mind all these issues that we talked about last week? Okay? And that's what we're going to move on to in the next few weeks. We're going to talk about green business next week, then sustainable project management for the next few weeks after that. Okay, the assessment. You can't read that, can you? We're going to talk about this in the seminars in more detail, okay? I'll tell you what, shall I leave it for the seminars, yeah? Because it's pointless me going through it now when you can't read it on there.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the assessment in the seminars. Don't worry about it. It's up on Blackboard now. You can download it and read the actual assessment itself. And we'll go through it over the next 2 days in the seminar. And I'll tell you what you need to do to get through it. Essentially, it's a 3,000-word academic essay due in for the 5th of December. Okay? We'll talk about that in the seminars. Apologies for the problems with it. Next week you can all come round to my house and we'll watch it on the cinema. You can come too.